There is a country at the center of everything we are. The wheel was invented here, so was writing, so was mathematics, astronomy, and the first law code ever pressed into clay. The first city that could be called a city rose from this soil. The first poem ever written down, the Epic of Gilgamesh, was composed in a language that no one alive can speak. The land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. They begin in the mountains of eastern Turkey, run southeast through Syria and Iraq, and empty into the Persian Gulf. Between them lies an alluvial plain so flat and so fertile that it allowed a handful of farming villages to become the first urban civilization on Earth. That was 7,000 years ago. Since then, this land has been conquered, burned, drained, bombed, and buried, more times than any other piece of ground in human history. Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Mongols, Ottomans, the British, and 2 American-led coalitions have all claimed this soil. Some built, most destroyed what the last ones built. And yet the rivers still flow, and people still live between them. How does the land that gave the world civilization keep burying itself? And why does it keep starting over? This is Iraq. It begins not with war, but with mud. In the far south, where the Euphrates slows and spreads across the plain, the desert disappears. Reeds rise from the water, not in scattered tufts, but in walls, 12, 15, 20 feet tall. A bamboo-like grass called kasab that grows so thick and so fast that it creates its own landscape. This is the Mesopotamian marshes. At their peak, they covered more than 20,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of Slovenia, the largest wetland ecosystem in the Middle East. A world of water, reed islands and narrow channels navigable only by canoe.
And they are not empty. They never have been.
The people who live here are called the Madan, the Marsh Arabs. Their ancestors settled these wetlands at least 5,000 years ago, possibly earlier. Some scholars believe they are descendants of the Sumerians themselves. Genetic research has found links between the Madan and the earliest known inhabitants of southern Mesopotamia. Their lives revolve around 3 things: reeds, water buffalo, and fish. The reeds are not just vegetation. They are building material, fuel, animal feed, and furniture. A Madan family harvests reeds the way a forest community harvests timber, except reeds grow back in weeks. The houses they build from these reeds are called mudif. They are architectural marvels, tall, arched structures with barrel-vaulted ceilings, constructed entirely without nails, wood, or glass. Bundles of kasab are planted in 2 rows, bent inward and tied at the top to form parabolic arches. Woven mats cover the frame. Lattice panels at each end allow light and airflow. A single mudif can be built in under 3 days. It can last more than 25 years. The entrance always faces Mecca. And these are not primitive shelters. The British Museum holds a carved stone relief from southern Mesopotamia, roughly 3,500 years old, that depicts a structure identical to a modern mudif. The same arches, the same proportions, the same reed bundles. Miri Najim is 58 years old. He is one of a handful of artisans in Dhikar province who still builds mudif by hand, using a 12-stage process passed down through generations. His clients now include government ministries, foreign oil companies, and private buyers in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah. "This is our heritage, history, and identity," he has said,
And we have to adhere to it
"and protect it regardless of the difficulty we face." The water buffalo are equally central. The Madan breed them by the thousands. The animals wade chest-deep in marsh water, grazing on reeds and aquatic plants. A healthy buffalo can weigh more than 500 kilograms. They are not wild, they are family. Each animal has a name. Breeders recognize their buffalo by sight, by sound, by temperament. A Madan family's wealth is measured not in currency, but in the size of its herd. Every morning before dawn, women and men wade into the marshes to gather fresh hashish, not the drug, but the Arabic word for grass and reeds, to supplement the buffalo's diet. The animals are washed, fed, and herded through channels to grazing grounds. In the evenings, they return to floating platforms of compacted reeds, where they sleep beside their owners' homes. Their milk produces gaymar, a thick, golden cream that is one of Iraq's most beloved breakfast foods, served with date molasses and fresh bread. The cream is skimmed after slow heating the milk overnight. It has a richness that cannot be replicated with pasteurized dairy. For the Madan, gaymar is not a luxury. It is breakfast. It is every morning of their lives. For centuries, the rhythm of the marshes did not change. The water rose in spring, fell in summer. Fish were abundant. Migratory birds, flamingos, pelicans, herons, arrived by the millions from Siberia and Africa, using the marshes as a critical stopover on the Afro-Eurasian flyway. At their peak in the 1950s, roughly 500,000 people lived in the marshes. By the year 2000, fewer than 1,600 remained. But that story belongs later. For now, the reeds are still standing. 400 kilometers to the north, a different kind of permanence rises from the plain. The Erbil citadel sits at the heart of the city of Erbil, the capital of Iraq's Kurdistan region. It is an oval-shaped tell, a mound created by thousands of years of human settlement, each generation building on top of the last, that rises more than 30 meters above the surrounding streets. The earliest evidence of habitation here dates to the 5th millennium BC, pottery fragments from the Neolithic period. The site appears in written records as early as 2300 BC in the Ebla tablets found in modern Syria. The Sumerians called it Erbilum. The Assyrians called it Arbela and made it a major religious center, home to a temple of the goddess Ishtar that rivaled those of Babylon and Assur. In 2019, NASA described the Erbil citadel as possibly the oldest continuously occupied human settlement on Earth. It was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2014, and one family still lives there. When the Kurdistan Regional Government relocated residents in 2007 to begin restoration work, a single family remained near the ancient gate, preserving the citadel's unbroken chain of habitation. 7,000 years, one family, still home. Below the citadel, the Kaysari Bazaar sprawls through narrow alleyways, a maze of spice sellers, carpet merchants, tea houses, and goldsmiths. The smell of cardamom and grilled meat. The sound of Kurdish, Arabic, Turkmen, and Assyrian voices layered on top of each other. Iraq is one of the most ethnically diverse nations in the Middle East. Arabs and Kurds make up the two largest groups, but the country is also home to Turkmen, Assyrians, Armenians, Yazidis, Mandaeans, and Shabaks, each with their own language, religious practice, and cultural identity. In the Erbil Bazaar, this diversity is not a policy statement. It is simply the sound of a normal afternoon. The Kurdish Textile Museum sits inside the citadel walls, a restored Ottoman-era mansion displaying traditional garments, hand-knotted rugs, and woven textiles from across the Kurdish regions. The patterns encode tribal identity and geography. A carpet from Sulaymaniyah looks nothing like a carpet from Duhok. The knots per square inch, the dye sources, the border designs, all carry information that a trained eye can read like a map. Erbil is Iraq's fourth largest city. It is also its most stable, its most open to visitors, and, for many foreigners, their first encounter with a version of Iraq that contradicts everything they expected. Because the Kurdistan region does not look like the Iraq most people imagine. Drive 30 minutes northeast of Erbil, and the flat plain gives way to the Zagros Mountains. The landscape transforms. Green valleys cut between limestone ridges. Waterfalls drop from cliff faces into pools surrounded by walnut and pomegranate trees. Kurdish villages of stone and plaster cling to hillsides. Rawanduz sits at the edge of a canyon so deep and so narrow that the town appears to hang from the rock itself. The gorge below drops hundreds of meters. The road through it, built in the 1920s by a New Zealand engineer named Archibald Hamilton, clings to the canyon wall in a series of switchbacks that still make drivers pause. Further into the mountains, the Gali Ali Bag waterfall drops from a limestone shelf into a turquoise pool, one of dozens of waterfalls hidden in valleys that see snow in winter and wildflowers in spring. Oak forests cover the upper slopes. The air smells of pine resin and wood smoke from villages where families still bake bread in clay ovens called tandoor. In the smaller Kurdish towns, Shaklawa, Amedi, Acre, life moves at a different speed. Old men play dominoes in tea houses built into hillsides. Children run between stone houses connected by narrow stairways. Women hang laundry from balconies overlooking valleys where sheep graze on terraced slopes. The hospitality is reflexive. A stranger walking through a village will be offered tea, fruit, and a seat before being asked a single question. In spring, during the Kurdish New Year celebration of Newroz, bonfires are lit on the mountaintops across Kurdistan. Families dress in traditional clothing, bright reds, greens, and yellows, and gather for picnics at historical sites. The celebration dates back thousands of years. The word Newroz itself means new day. For the Kurds of northern Iraq, every new day has been earned. But not all inhabitants of these mountains walk on two legs. The Persian leopard is the largest subspecies of leopard on Earth. Adults can weigh more than 90 kilograms. Their coats are pale, almost golden, with widely spaced rosettes adapted to the dry, rocky terrain of the Zagros. Fewer than 1,000 are believed to remain across their entire range, from eastern Turkey through Iran and into the mountains of northern Iraq. They are classified as endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. In Iraq, they survive in the remote valleys and high ridges of Kurdistan, far from roads, far from towns, rarely seen. Camera trap surveys have confirmed their presence in several locations, but population numbers in Iraq remain uncertain. What is certain is that they were here before the first Kurdish village was built, before the first Assyrian army marched through these passes. They do not need civilization, but they have learned to live alongside what remains of it. The mountains that shelter leopards have not always sheltered the people who live among them. On March 16, 1988, Iraqi military aircraft fly over the Kurdish town of Halabja. The first bombs release a mixture of mustard gas and nerve agents. The chemicals settle over the town like fog. Approximately 5,000 civilians die in a single day. Many are children. Photographs taken in the aftermath show families frozen in their doorways, parents still holding infants. Halabja is part of a larger campaign. Between 1987 and 1988, the Iraqi government conducts what it calls the Anfal, a series of military operations against Kurdish civilians in the north. Chemical weapons, mass executions, forced deportation. More than 2,000 villages are destroyed. Estimates of the dead range from 50,000 to 180,000. The campaign is recognized by many courts and international bodies as genocide. Today, a memorial stands in Halabja. The town has been rebuilt, but the soil remembers. South of Kurdistan, south of Baghdad, the land flattens and dries. The mountains disappear entirely. Western Iraq becomes a different country, a vast rocky desert that stretches toward Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Temperatures in summer exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Dust storms sweep across the plateau and turn the sky a dark copper, even at midday. This is the part of Iraq that most closely matches the Western imagination: flat, brown, featureless. But it is not empty. Bedouin communities have traversed these routes for centuries. Ancient wadis, dry riverbeds that flood violently during rare rains, cut through the limestone plateau. Along their banks, hardy shrubs and desert grasses provide grazing for goats and camels. The Western Desert holds its own archaeology too. The fortified city of Hatra, a Parthian stronghold 2,000 years old, rises from the sand like a mirage. Its columns and carved facades survived until fighters from the Islamic State damaged portions of the site in 2015.
But follow the Euphrates south,
and the desert breaks open again. The city of Basra sits near the mouth of the Shat al-Arab, the waterway formed where the Tigris and the Euphrates finally converge after their parallel journeys across the country. Basra was once one of the greenest cities in the Middle East. In the 1970s, more than 30 million date palms lined its canals and riverbanks. Iraq was among the world's top 3 date producers. The fruit was not merely a crop. It was woven into the culture, the economy, the daily breakfast table. Today, fewer than 1 million palms remain. Many were cut down during the Iran-Iraq War, when Saddam Hussein ordered their removal to prevent enemy fighters from using them as cover near oil facilities. Others died when the water table dropped. Others simply were not replanted. What Basra still has is masgouf, Iraq's national dish. A whole carp, often pulled that morning from the river, is split open, pinned to wooden stakes, and grilled slowly beside an open fire of tamarisk wood. The fish hangs sideways, cooked not above the flame, but beside it, absorbing smoke for hours. The technique is unlike any other method of grilling in the Middle East. The heat is indirect. The flavor comes from patience. Along the Shat al-Arab, restaurants serve masgouf at long outdoor tables beside the water. Families gather at sunset. The fish arrives golden, crisp-skinned, with a bowl of pickled vegetables and fresh flatbread. It is not fast food. It is a meal that takes as long to eat as it does to cook. Iraq's food culture runs deeper than any single dish. In homes across the country, dolma, vine leaves and vegetables stuffed with spiced rice and minced lamb, is prepared for gatherings that can feed 30 people from a single pot. The recipe varies by family, by city, by region. Every grandmother insists hers is the original.
The arguments over dolma
Are the only war in Iraq where everyone wins. And at the very end of the Shat al-Arab, where the river meets the Persian Gulf, there is something almost no one expects: a coral reef. 28 square kilometers of living coral in some of the most extreme conditions any reef endures on Earth. Water temperatures swing between 14 and 34 degrees Celsius across the year. The water is turbid, heavy with sediment from the two rivers. For years, scientists assumed no coral could survive here. They were wrong. Iraqi corals were only confirmed in 2013. They harbor stone corals, octocorals, sea urchins, and sponges. A living ecosystem at the edge of a country most people associate only with sand and war. Proof that life, given enough time and enough stubbornness, adapts to conditions that should be impossible. Between Basra and Baghdad, the landscape carries a weight that is harder to see but impossible to miss once you know what to look for. The city of Najaf rises from the desert about 160 kilometers south of Baghdad. It is one of the holiest cities in Shia Islam, home to the shrine of Imam Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. But Najaf holds something else: Wadi al-Salam, the Valley of Peace, the largest cemetery on Earth, more than 1,400 acres, more than 6 million burials. Some estimates place it higher. The graves stretch to the horizon in every direction, layer upon layer. Many are simple stone slabs. Others are ornate family tombs with arched roofs and tiled facades. From above, it looks like a second city, denser, quieter, and far older than the living city beside it. Shia Muslims from across the world request burial here. To be interred near the shrine of Imam Ali is considered one of the greatest honors in Shia tradition. New burials occur every day. The cemetery is growing. Grave diggers work in the heat of summer, carving out spaces in a grid that has been expanding outward for 14 centuries. There are waiting lists. Within the cemetery, narrow paths wind between the tombs. Families visit to read from the Quran, pour water over the graves, and sit in the shade of the headstones. The ritual is quiet, intimate, and deeply personal. Grief in Iraq is not a private matter. It is communal, it is visible, and in Wadi al-Salam, it is permanent. In a country where so much has been buried, cities, empires, languages, entire peoples, Wadi al-Salam makes the act of burial itself visible. 6 million people laid to rest in one place over 14 centuries. Millions of pilgrims also travel each year to nearby Karbala, where the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, Imam Hussein, was killed in battle in 680 AD. The annual Arba'een pilgrimage draws an estimated 20 million people on foot. one of the largest peaceful gatherings in human history. Further north, at the edge of the desert, the remains of something far older rise from the dust. The ziggurat of Ur stands in the flat plain near the modern city of Nasiriyah. It was built around 2100 BC, more than 4,000 years ago, by King Ur-Nammu of the third dynasty of Ur. A stepped pyramid of mud brick and baked brick, sealed with bitumen, dedicated to the moon god Nana. The engineering is precise. The builders included drainage channels in the terraces to carry away winter rain. They punched ventilation holes through the outer casing so moisture could evaporate from the mud brick core, preventing the structure from rotting from within. The baked bricks weigh up to 15 kilograms each. The foundation alone required more than 700,000 of them. The ziggurat crumbled over 2 millennia. In the 6th century BC, the last king of Babylon, Nabonidus,
rebuilt it,
taller than before. Then it crumbled again. In the 1920s, the British archaeologist Leonard Woolley excavated the site and uncovered not just the ziggurat, but the royal tombs of Ur, gold headdresses, lyres inlaid with lapis lazuli, evidence of a sophistication that rewrote the West's understanding of early civilization. Among the tombs was the burial of Queen Puabi, dating to roughly 2500 BC. She was interred with a golden headdress of leaves and flowers, gold and carnelian jewelry, and a golden cup at her side. Around her lay the remains of attendants, men, women, and oxen, who had accompanied her into death. The tombs revealed a society of extraordinary wealth, artistic skill, and ritual complexity at a time when most of Europe was still in the Stone Age. Woolley's assistant on the dig was a young man named Max Mallowan. He would later marry Agatha Christie. She visited Ur several times and wrote a memoir about living on archaeological sites in Iraq and Syria. She once said that an archaeologist was the best husband a woman could have. The older she got, the more interested he would be in her. In the 1980s, Saddam Hussein rebuilt the ziggurat's lower facade and monumental staircase. During the Gulf War in 1991, the structure was damaged. Over 400 bullet holes pockmark its walls, and 4 bomb craters scar the ground nearby. Saddam had parked MiG fighter jets beside the ancient monument, betting that coalition forces would not bomb a heritage site. He was mostly right. The ziggurat survived. The jets did not. Near the ziggurat, archaeologists believe they have identified the remains of a residential compound dating to roughly 1900 BC. Religious tradition identifies it as the House of Abraham, the patriarch shared by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Whether or not the attribution is accurate, the connection has drawn Christian pilgrims to Ur in increasing numbers, and a modern tourism complex called Ur Tourist City is now being developed beside the ruins. A 5,000-year-old temple, a 4,000-year-old house, a 21st century tourist village, 3 Iraqs standing side by side. In the shallow waters of the southern marshes, something moves beneath the surface. The Euphrates soft-shell turtle is one of the rarest reptiles in the Middle East. It is found only in the Tigris-Euphrates river system, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and a small stretch of Iran. Its shell is flat and leathery, unlike the hard domes of most turtles. It can grow to nearly half a meter in length. The species has lived in these rivers since before the Sumerians settled their banks, before Ur was built, before the first cuneiform tablet was pressed into wet clay. Its population has declined sharply. Habitat loss, pollution, dam construction upstream. The same forces threatening the marshes are threatening the animals that depend on them. But it is still here. Fishermen in southern Iraq still report sightings. Surveys continue to confirm breeding populations in scattered sections of the river system. It survives the way most things in Iraq survive, quietly, in the spaces between human ambitions. 250 kilometers north of the marshes, Baghdad straddles the Tigris. Roughly 8 million people live in the greater metropolitan area. It is the largest city in Iraq, the second largest in the Arab world after Cairo, and one of the oldest major cities in continuous existence. The Baghdad most people picture, blast walls, checkpoints, armored convoys, is not wrong. But it is incomplete. On the east bank of the Tigris, Al-Mutanabi Street runs for a few hundred meters through the old quarter. It is named after a 10th century Iraqi poet, and it is Baghdad's literary heart. Every Friday, the street fills with booksellers. Tables line the sidewalks, stacked with volumes in Arabic, Kurdish, English, and Farsi, poetry, philosophy, engineering manuals, novels, children's books. Cafes spill out between the stalls. In 2007, a car bomb on Al-Mutanabi Street killed more than 30 people and destroyed several bookshops and the storied Shabandar Cafe. The cafe was rebuilt. The booksellers returned. Al-Mutanabi Street is open again every Friday. Baghdad's tea culture is its own institution. Tea, served black, sweet, in small glass cups called istikans, is not merely a drink, it is the currency of conversation. Every meeting begins with tea, every negotiation, every reconciliation. Roadside tea vendors operate from dawn to well past midnight, pouring from brass kettles over charcoal burners set up on sidewalks, at intersections, beside construction sites. It is perhaps the most democratic ritual in Iraq. Rich and poor, Sunni and Shia, Arab and Kurd, everyone drinks tea. But Baghdad was not always struggling to remember what it used to be. There was a time when the rest of the world came here to learn. In the 8th century, the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid established a library in Baghdad that would grow into one of the most important intellectual institutions in human history. It was called Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Under his son, Al-Mamun, it expanded into a full academy. Translators, researchers, astronomers, physicians. Scholars from across the Islamic world and beyond it gathered here. Greek texts by Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen were translated into Arabic. Original research in algebra, optics, and medicine was conducted. The translator, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Christian from Tikrit, mastered Arabic, Persian, Syriac, and Greek. He began translating at 17. Over his career, he rendered more than 260 works into Arabic. For each manuscript he produced, the Caliph paid him its weight in gold. Baghdad in the 9th century held a population of more than 1 million people. It was arguably the largest, wealthiest, and most intellectually productive city on Earth. February 10th, 1258. The Mongol prince Hulagu Khan breaches Baghdad's eastern wall. The Caliph, al-Mustazim, surrenders. What follows is 13 days of destruction. Libraries, mosques, hospitals, 5 centuries of accumulated knowledge reduced to rubble. The books of the House of Wisdom are thrown into the Tigris. Estimates of the dead vary wildly. Hulagu himself claimed 200,000. Later accounts say far more. What is not disputed is the scale of cultural loss. The Islamic Golden Age, which had radiated outward from Baghdad for half a millennium, effectively ended. The river absorbed the ink. But Baghdad did not die. It diminished. It suffered Ottoman rule, British mandate, monarchy, revolution, dictatorship, and invasion. But it did not disappear. Today, young Iraqis gather in riverside cafes along Abu Nuwas Street, named after an 8th century poet famous for his irreverence. University students debate in the same parks where Abbasid scholars once argued over Aristotle. Street vendors sell fresh pomegranate juice from carts. Traffic jams, a universal sign of a city stubbornly, noisily alive. In the evenings, families walk along the Tigris Corniche. Fathers carry children on their shoulders. Teenagers take selfies against the sunset. The smell of grilled kebab drifts from restaurants whose tables spill onto the pavement. Baghdad is loud. It has always been loud. Silence in this city has usually meant something bad was about to happen. North of Baghdad, the city of Samarra holds one of the most striking structures in the Islamic world. The Malwiya, the spiral minaret of the Great Mosque of Samarra, rises more than 50 meters in a continuous ascending ramp that winds counterclockwise from base to peak. Built in the 9th century, when the Abbasid caliphs briefly moved their capital here, it remains one of the most distinctive architectural silhouettes in the Middle East. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, it stands largely intact, a corkscrew of baked brick turning against an empty sky. Down the Tigris, south of Baghdad, the Arch of Ctesiphon still stands. The Tak Khazra, a Sasanian vault from the 6th century, the largest single-span brick arch of the ancient world. It has survived earthquakes, floods, and 2 millennia of neglect. Half the facade has collapsed, the other half refuses to. And further south, more ruins. Babylon. The name still carries weight. Hammurabi's law code, the first comprehensive legal system ever recorded, was inscribed here around 1750 BC. 282 laws carved into a basalt stele more than 2 meters tall. Among them, protections for widows, regulations for wages, penalties for medical malpractice. The original stele now stands in the Louvre in Paris. A replica stands in Baghdad. Nebuchadnezzar II turned the city into a marvel. The Ishtar Gate, its blue-glazed bricks decorated with golden lions and bulls, became one of the most recognizable structures of the ancient world. The Hanging Gardens, if they existed, were said to be among the 7 wonders. In the 1980s, Saddam Hussein began reconstructing Babylon. He built new walls on top of the ancient foundations. The bricks were stamped, "In the reign of the victorious Saddam Hussein, the protector of Iraq, who rebuilt civilization and rebuilt Babylon." He placed his name directly above inscriptions left by Nebuchadnezzar 2,500 years earlier. Babylon was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2019, with the condition that Saddam's additions be recognized as part of its complex, layered history rather than erased. Further north, the remains of another empire tell a darker, recent story. Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, once the largest city in the world, around 700 BC, sits across the Tigris from modern Mosul. Its iconic Lamassu, Winged bulls with human heads, weighing tons, guarded the city gates for nearly 3,000 years. In 2015, fighters from the Islamic State entered the Mosul Museum and attacked the Lamassu with sledgehammers. They bulldozed sections of the ancient walls. They released videos of the destruction. Reconstruction is now underway. Iraqi and international teams are piecing together what can be recovered. But some things cannot be unbroken. And yet, in the mountains above Erbil, in the Shanidar cave, something survives that is older than all of it. In the 1950s, archaeologist Ralph Selecki discovered Neanderthal burials here dating back more than 60,000 years. Pollen found around the remains suggested the dead had been buried with wildflowers. It remains debated among scientists, but the possibility is striking that in this very landscape, tens of thousands of years before the first city, someone placed flowers on a grave. The instinct to honor the dead may be older than civilization itself. In the steppe deserts west of the Tigris, where the land dries to cracked hardpan and limestone outcrops, a different kind of survival plays out in near silence. The goited gazelle once ranged across Iraq's western and central plains by the tens of thousands. Named for the enlarged throat of the males during mating season, it is a lean, fast animal, built for flat, open ground, able to sprint at speeds exceeding 60 kilometers per hour. Decades of war stripped Iraq of functioning wildlife enforcement. Firearms became widespread. Hunting, once regulated, became uncontrolled. Soldiers, militiamen, and impoverished civilians alike shot whatever they could find. Vultures, hares, migratory ducks, and gazelles were all targeted. "Everyone here has a gun," one tribal sheik in rural Kirkuk told a National Geographic reporter. "And when you have a gun, you shoot." The goited gazelle has not disappeared from Iraq entirely. Small herds survive in remote areas of the Western Desert and in pockets of broken terrain near the mountains. But their numbers are a fraction of what they once were. Iraq's wildlife tells the same story as its architecture, its libraries, its people. What survives does so by finding the spaces that war forgot. But Iraq is not only a country of loss, it is also a country of sound. Maqam is the classical music tradition of Iraq. It is one of the oldest living musical forms in the Arab world, rooted in Arabic poetry, structured around melodic modes that trace their lineage back centuries. A Maqam performance is not background music, it is an event. A vocalist, the Qari, leads, accompanied by a small ensemble that may include oud, santur, joza, and tabla. The performance unfolds in stages, modulating between modes, building and releasing tension over the course of an hour or more. The santur, a hammered dulcimer struck with delicate wooden mallets, produces a sound that is unmistakably Iraqi, bright, shimmering, slightly melancholic. It sits at the center of the Maqam ensemble the way the piano sits at the center of a jazz trio, carrying the melody while leaving space for the voice to wander. In Baghdad, Maqam once filled the cafes along the river every evening. The tradition suffered under sanctions, war, and emigration. Many of Iraq's finest musicians left the country, but it has not vanished. Younger musicians are learning the old modes. Recordings circulate. In private gatherings and occasional public concerts, the sound persists. It persists the way Iraqi food persists. Dolma, made from vine leaves stuffed with spiced rice, kuzi of slow-roasted lamb, tashrib of bread soaked in broth. recipes that grandmothers carried from Baghdad to Amman to Detroit to Stockholm. The Iraqi diaspora, one of the largest in the Middle East, carried its kitchen along with its grief. And at the southern end of the country, on the flat shores near Basra, Iraq's other surviving tradition endures in a landscape that most of the world believes is already gone. The Mesopotamian marshes. In the 1970s, this ecosystem was roughly the size of Lebanon. 10,500 square kilometers of interconnected waterways, floating islands, and dense reed beds. It was home to 40 species of birds as permanent residents and served as a critical stopover for millions of migratory birds on the flyway between Siberia and Africa. Beneath the surface, the marshes supported more than 40 species of freshwater fish. Barbels and carp grew large in the warm, shallow water. The shabout, a massive cyprinid that can exceed a meter in length, was the prize of marsh fishermen, hauled from deeper channels using techniques unchanged for millennia. Above, the air filled with the sound of kingfishers, herons stalking the shallows on stilt-thin legs, and the low grunting of water buffalo wading through chest-high reeds. The ecosystem functioned as a natural water filter. As river water slowed and spread through the marshes, sediment settled, nutrients were absorbed by plants, and what emerged was cleaner than what entered. The marshes also acted as a natural flood buffer, absorbing the spring surges of the Tigris and Euphrates and releasing water slowly as summer dried the plains. Without them, downstream cities like Basra flooded more frequently and farmland lost its natural irrigation cycle. 90% of the world's population of the Basra reed warbler, a small, brown, endangered songbird, breeds in the reed beds of the Iraqi marshes. The bird builds its nest by weaving strips of reed leaf around vertical stems, suspending it above the waterline. When the water rises, the nest rises with it. When the marshes dry, the warbler has nowhere else to go. Its survival is tethered to this one ecosystem. There is no backup habitat, no second population elsewhere. In 1991, after the Shia uprising against his regime, Saddam Hussein turned his attention to the marshes. The wetlands had sheltered insurgents. The Maidan had given them refuge, as they had given refuge to escaped slaves and dissidents for centuries. It was the tradition of the mudhif. The door is always open. No guest is refused. Saddam's response was total. Using a drainage plan originally devised by British engineers in the 1950s, a plan abandoned when it began disrupting water flow, the government constructed canals, embankments, and diversion channels to redirect the Tigris and Euphrates away from the marshes. The water was drained systematically. Within a decade, the marshes were gone. What had been green water and reed walls became cracked, barren earth. Fish died. Buffalo herds collapsed. Birds vanished. The food chain that had sustained 500,000 people simply ceased to exist. Villages were attacked. Water that remained was reportedly poisoned. Families fled to camps, to cities, to Iran. Of the roughly 500,000 marsh Arabs living in the wetlands in 1991, only an estimated 1,600 remained by the year 2000, still living in the traditional way. NASA described the draining as one of the largest environmental disasters in the world. Jassim al-Assadi was born in a boat in the Central Marshes in 1957. As a boy, he watched fishermen row canoes through the reeds while buffalo bathed in water so clean you could see the bottom. Women sang as they gathered reeds. The marshes were his entire world. He left to attend university in Baghdad, joined the Iraqi Communist Party. In 1977, he was arrested by security police during a visit home to Chibaish. He was jailed and tortured for 9 months. "I was fortunate," he said later. "Many of my friends and colleagues were killed or forced to flee the country." He finished his degree, served 5 years in the army during the Iran-Iraq War, returned to Chibaish, and then the marshes began to disappear. Like most of the other residents, Jassim and his family were forced to leave. They moved 400 kilometers north to Babil, modern Babylon. He began working in Baghdad for the Ministry of Water Resources. It was there, inside the ministry, that he discovered the truth. The draining was not a natural disaster. It was not a side effect of upstream dams. It was a deliberate, systematic campaign to destroy the marshes and displace the people who lived in them. In 2003, after the fall of Saddam's regime, young men in the south took pickaxes and water pumps to the embankments and dikes that had blocked the water. Word spread. Others joined. Within weeks, water from the Tigris and Euphrates began flowing back into the dried marsh beds. Jassim was there. He convinced the Ministry of Water Resources to assist with the larger dikes that required heavy equipment. "The water started flowing back to the marshes," he said, "and life in the marshes returned." By 2005, roughly 70% of the drained marshes had been re-flooded. Birds came back. Fish populations began to recover. Madan families returned from the cities, rebuilt their mudhif, and brought their water buffalo home. The marshes were designated a Ramsar wetland of international importance in 2007. In 2016, they were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a mixed cultural and natural designation recognizing both the ecosystem and the ancient Sumerian cities at its edges. And in the shallow channels of the recovering marshes, something reappeared that scientists had feared was gone forever. The Iraqi smooth-coated otter, an endemic subspecies found nowhere else on Earth, Lutragale perspicillata maxwelli, was declared locally extinct after the marshes were drained. Its habitat had simply ceased to exist. But after the reflooding, surveys confirmed the otter had survived. Small populations had held on, in remnant channels, in pockets of water that the draining had not quite reached. A species named for a land that tried to kill it, still fishing in the same rivers. The marshes, however, are not safe. Since 2021, southern Iraq has experienced its worst drought in 40 years. Upstream dams in Turkey and Iran continue to reduce the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates into Iraq. The government estimates that 1/4 of Iraq's fresh water will be lost in the next decade. According to Jassim al-Assadi, roughly 33% of the marsh's water buffalo have perished in the last 4 years. 95% of the fish have died. Buffalo breeders are selling their herds and migrating to cities. Each time you lose a buffalo, it feels like you're losing your children, one 40-year-old breeder and father of 9 told a reporter.
So it is very painful.
Each time they die, or I am forced to sell them. In February of 2023, Jassim al-Assadi was kidnapped by an unidentified armed group. He was held for 16 days. He was tortured with electricity and beaten with sticks. He was moved from location to location. He was released after intervention by the Iraqi Prime Minister. He went back to work. He is still in Chibayish, still monitoring water levels, still meeting with buffalo breeders and fishermen, still giving lectures and attending conferences about water and climate change. Not long before the kidnapping, Jassim visited his aging uncle, Abu Abbas, who was bedridden and failing. "What is the status of the marshes?" Abu Abbas asked. Jassim began to answer, to describe the drought, the dying fish, the families leaving. His uncle cut him off. "Do not be afraid for the marshes," Abu Abbas said. "They will survive, even if the water is salty, as long as there are people like you who will defend them." Jassim's co-founder at Nature Iraq, Azam Al-Wash, is an Iraqi-American hydraulic engineer who left his consulting career in California to lead the Eden Again Marsh Restoration Project after 2003. He moved back to Iraq, to a country still at war, because he believed the marshes could be saved. He is still there. There is a belief among the Marsh Arabs about creatures called Tantals, mythical beings sent down from the heavens to guard the ancient cities buried beneath the marshes. As a child, Jassim's mother told him to be wary of Tantals when he went out at night. But the Tantals do not just guard the cities. In the broader tradition, they protect the marshes themselves. Through floods, drought, fire, and the worst that human beings have done, the marshes survive, because the Tantals will not let them go. Perhaps it is easier to believe in Tantals than in governments, in treaties, in upstream dams being opened. Perhaps faith in mythical guardians is what keeps you going when the water table drops and the fish die and the buffalo are sold off one by one. Iraq's Ministry of Water Resources estimates that the country's water reserves have already been halved. Climate models project further reductions. The Tigris and the Euphrates, the two rivers that gave this land its ancient name, its fertility, and its meaning, are shrinking. No one knows how long the marshes can hold. No one knows whether the Mudif that Miri Najim builds today will have reeds to harvest in 30 years. No one knows whether the Basra reed warbler, which has no other home, will find enough standing water to nest in next spring. This is the land that invented writing and could not write its own ending. The land that built the first cities and watched them be buried and dug them up and built again. The rivers still flow, thinner now, slower, warmer, but they flow, and between them, in the oldest inhabited landscape on Earth, people are still building houses from reeds, still grilling fish beside open fires, still pouring tea into small glass cups, still laying their dead to rest in the largest cemetery the world has ever known. Whether that is persistence or stubbornness or something closer to faith, only the rivers know, and they are not talking. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.